This is Mrs. Doubtfire versus Transphobia. Objection! This case should not go forward. The statute of limitations has expired, and transphobia is not a crime. Overruled. This isn't a real courtroom. I would also like to ask the jury to listen to all the evidence and withhold judgment till the end. You may now lay down the foundation of your case. Thank you, Your Honor. Here are the facts of this case. Daniel Hillard is a father and voice actor. The film starts off with him being fired for not wanting to promote cigarettes to children. He also throws a party against his wife's objections. And she's immediately called down to her house to break up the house party that was against her wishes. They get divorced, and she admits she doesn't love him anymore. In the meantime, Daniel decides to go stay with his brother and his partner. The judge tells him after 3 months if he gets housing and employment, then he can split joint custody with his ex. So he gets a job boxing and shipping films. And Miranda ends up dating Stuart, who's actually a really nice guy and likes the kids. And he gets upset that Miranda's picking up the kids too early, which is fair. It's his one day. He's entitled to that time with the kids. He hears that Miranda is setting up an ad for someone to watch the kids during the day, decides to change the phone number on the ad and call in as fake applicants, and then eventually calling in as Mrs. Doubtfire. But there's this notable exchange.
I don't work with the males, cause I used to be one.
Which is, of course, transphobic. No one can deny this. Also, today, it doesn't seem that odd that a man could fill these roles. Not to mention, it's a little odd that he chose to be a woman in this role, when in fact, anyone of any gender could presumably fill this role. But I guess that's just where things were in the 90s. And so Daniel goes to his brother and says,
"Could you make me a woman?"
Honey, I'm so happy.
I knew you'd understand.
Could be a positive trans moment. Then they go in and plaster his face with fake teeth, which helps with the disguise, but this sort of leads to the idea that cross-dressing is a lot of heavy makeup, which can be true, but definitely not this amount of heavy makeup. And so he goes as Mrs. Doubtfire to meet the family. And really, in this whole moment, the whole thing could fall apart if any one of them recognizes. Then, the court-appointed liaison, Mrs. Sellner, comes to visit, and Daniel, who's just coming home, as Mrs. Doubtfire, says she is his sister. And he does some quick swaps back and forth in a comedic story. Fun moment. Throughout the film, he's very manipulative of Miranda. There's a very clear scene of this where he asks Miranda to give a score to him based on how he did in bed. And that's a very man thing to do. If you're cooking, be very careful with your prostheses. You don't want them to light on fire. Since he messed up dinner, he has to order delivery. And the driver says it'll be $135 for 4 people, which is really cheap, especially considering 20 of that is for rushing. So when you really think about it, those are some really cheap meals. Doesn't really get talked about with this film is how the hell he doesn't pass out, especially with that pool scene. Like, how the hell did he not pass out? And why is he drinking? Never drink while you're undercover. It's a bad idea. Not to mention there's this homophobic, transphobic joke.
It's on me.
Thanks.
And then there's a trans panic scene with terms like half man, half woman. Then Daniel decides to come clean to his older kids and they sort of get it. And his son doesn't want to hug him because it's a guy thing. Since I'm not a guy, I can't comment on that. Also, there are 2 songs in the film that, while are not transphobic in and of themselves, do aid to the expression that there is a humor in the fact of man dressing as woman, which is a sexist idea, such as the songs Dudes Look Like a Lady and Walk Like a Man. So his boss and Miranda want to go to the same restaurant on the same night at the same time.
Smoking or non-smoking? Non-smoking.
Weird that restaurants used to have smoking sections and that children were allowed to sit in them. And also, for a party of 5, wouldn't you want to make a reservation, especially for a special occasion like this? But the thing is, why couldn't Daniel called as Mrs. Doubtfire sick? It happens. Just be very apologetic the next day.
The jambalaya. And make mine not spicy. I'm allergic to pepper.
Who orders jambalaya and not spicy? I mean, come on. Stuart doesn't even have an allergic reaction. That's the thing about this scene. He doesn't actually have an allergic reaction. He's choking. Choking is not an allergic reaction, and it happens almost immediately. But then Daniel comes in and awkwardly saves the day, but then somehow gets a drag TV show for kids, making every conservative in the country pissed. Part of the judge's statement at the end was how he's been living this unorthodox lifestyle, which is a homophobic and transphobic thing that have been spurled towards the LGBTQ+ community. However, I don't necessarily hold this against the film because homophobia and transphobia are just part of life, and depicting that does not make it necessarily transphobic or homophobic. And then the judge sentences Daniel to only have supervised visitation rights. But somehow this is just overturned by his ex-wife just working it out, which I don't think is realistic to how this works. And a lot of the humor in there comes from cross-dressing. Cross-dressing can involve humor, but cross-dressing for the sake of cross-dressing isn't funny. I would also like to make a motion that this case is not about Robin Williams. May he rest in peace. Agreed. At its core, this film is about a father trying to reconnect with his kids. If anything, this film is a satire of transphobia. It did not originate these tropes, but it subverts a lot of them. And there are queer characters in this film being played by queer actors, and that shows the intent behind it. We disagree. The narrative itself is transphobic. How so? Film does not need a trans character to be transphobic. How so? People don't know the difference between being transgender and being a crossdresser. A crossdresser is someone who wears the clothing of the opposite gender to them in the gender binary. Trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary people are non-binary and valid. A trans man who dresses like a woman is a crossdresser. A trans woman who dresses like a man is a crossdresser. Also, for the record, trans people and crossdressers are less likely to be sex offenders than cis men, who are the majority of sex offenders. However, to someone who wouldn't know the difference, they may watch this film and think, that's a trans woman trying to deceive people. Not to mention the idea of men dressing up as women for comedy is sexist, because the opposite isn't true. When a man dresses like a woman is deemed to be funny, but a woman dressing like a man is not, that says there is something wrong about being a woman. You've all made some great points. Now it's time for the jury to decide. But you must be respectful. And for those of you in the gallery, it would really mean a lot if you could help this courtroom out. You can subscribe, like this video, leave a comment, and you can also sign up for Patreon. On there, you get to see extended versions of these videos, early access for $5 and $10 patrons, and $10 patrons like Jeremy Bottoms get shoutouts in videos just like this. So head on over to Patreon and make it happen. You can also help out by becoming a YouTube channel member or TikTok subscriber. Not to mention patrons, YouTube channel members, and TikTok subscribers get to watch the series Trans 101. The basics of being trans and how to transition. It's a really informative series and you'll likely enjoy it. It's 2 p.m. A baby is being born. The doctor exclaims, "It's a boy." The family gathers around the baby and imagines him on his wedding day, wearing a suit and marrying a woman. That doesn't happen. So head on over and help this courtroom out. That's an order.